is Stacy Millette, Executive Director of the North Carolina Center for Health and Wellness, anchored here at the University of North Carolina, Asheville. I am thrilled to welcome you to the live stream of the keynote address for the National Physical Education Institute. Enjoy.
Woohoo! Thank you. Thank you. We would like to welcome you and the audience to the second day of the National PE Institute 15, and we have a very special guest. And so it is my honor and privilege to bring on stage Dr. Dolly Lambden of Shape America. Dolly.
Thanks, Arnie. I'm just thrilled to be here. The energy here is fantastic. Thank you all for what you do for kids every day. I'm really excited about what's happening in the world today. The whole movement on Twitter of people saying, I want to be the best physical education teacher I can be. And I want to help other people to do that too. I want to raise the bar for everybody. So it just carries out the mission that Shape America has had to champion health and physical education teachers as key to having every child in this country get the education they need to have the confidence and competence and desire to be physically active for their lifetime. We've been calling this 50 million strong this year. The idea of us not just having great physical education programs and trying to make them better and better, but taking responsibility to see, are we going to get every child in the nation to the point where they have the confidence and the competence to do what they need to do. So everybody here and all across the country has a number. What's your number of the 50 million strong? How many kids do you impact? And can you take that commitment to say, I'm going to try to make sure that every one of my kids gets what they need? Not just the ones that get it easily, but all the kids. How are we going to really pay attention to what students are graduating with? So I invite you to join us with the same energy that's been on Twitter, that's been here at this conference. It was in Seattle. And join in to 50 million strong. We have the podcast that just started yesterday with Colin and Matt. There's just so many ways that we can come together and connect. So thank you all for being here and what you do every day.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Again, on stage today, we're having, we have 5 international guests, and each of them have been hand-selected as a group to really tell us what the future of physical education will look like. It is my privilege now to introduce Dr. Ash Casey. He's the one individual that is not a practitioner. All the other 4 folks are actual real-life physical education teachers, but he teaches physical education teachers. He's an academic, and he has a lot to share. So, Dr. Ash Casey.
Okay, so before I start, I have a stutter. So if I tell you, I don't stutter. So it saves you time and it saves me a pain to get that out there. So first of all, welcome to my talk, which is Groundhog Day, being the change and changing our being. And it would be wrong of me not to thank a few people. So Loughborough University for allowing me to be here, and obviously the National PE Institute. I wanted to add some other thank yous. Lots of people who've connected with me on social media, who've responded to my blog, who make me better at what I do all the time, and I want to add them. I couldn't fit everybody's picture on there. Okay, so a little bit about me. Artie said I teach teachers, but I was a teacher. I taught what you would call from 11 to 18 for 15 years, and then I became a teacher educator. And one of my goals with moving from teaching to teacher education was to continue to engage with teachers. So I'm absolutely humbled and delighted to be here to do this. And one way I do this, which most of you know, is I have a website called Pepin. And I write a weekly blog called Major Themes in Physical Education Research, where I take a paper or a book chapter from an academic book, and I try to make it accessible to teachers. And the first 95 blogs on Pepin was a single book. This was supposed to be the seminal papers in physical education as voted for by a number of academics. So what I've done for this presentation is I've gone back through all 95 blogs and I've reanalyzed them, and I've tried to extract the enduring themes from those, which I'm going to now present to you for what the research has said about physical education, and try to look at how our Groundhog Day, or in this case Groundhog Days, are repeating themselves and how we might move beyond them. But just in case you don't know the film Groundhog Day, for your viewing pleasure,
Groundhog time.
1,000 people freezing their butts off waiting to worship a rat.
Weatherman Phil Connors is spending the day in Puxatawney, Pennsylvania.
Phil? Ned Ryerson. I did the whistling belly button trick at the high school talent show.
Bing!
Bang!
But Phil's about to find out he's not just stuck in Puxatawney.
Will you be checking out today, Mr. Connors?
Chance of departure today, 100%.
He's stuck in Groundhog Day.
I'm reliving the same day over and over.
Phil?
Ned Ryerson?
Bang!
Do you ever have deja vu, Mrs. Lancaster?
I don't think so, but I could check with the kitchen.
Well, it's Groundhog Day. Again?
At first, he was a little anxious.
Phil? What?
Will you be checking out today, Mr. Connors?
I'd say the chance of departure is 80%.
But now,
We could do whatever we want.
he's discovering the possibilities
Don't you worry about cholesterol?
Why?
and living life like there's no tomorrow.
Phil Connors!
Ned!
Because there isn't.
I am an immortal. I have been stabbed, shot, burned, frozen, electrocuted. I'm a god.
You're God.
I'm a god. I'm not the god. He's out of his gourd.
But to get what his heart wants most
What are you looking for, Phil? A date for the weekend?
means living this day over again till he gets it right.
Believe it or not, I studied 19th century French poetry.
What a waste of time.
I studied 19th century French poetry.
La fille qui j'aimerais.
You speak French?
Oui.
Bill Murray, Andy McDowell,
To the groundhog.
I always drink to world peace. Well, what should we drink to?
I like to say a prayer and drink to world peace. Don't drive angry. Don't drive angry. He might be okay. Yes!
life has a funny way of repeating itself.
What did you do today?
Oh, same old, same old.
Okay, so Groundhog Day. Oxford Dictionary definition in English, a situation in which a series of unwelcome or tedious events appear to be recurring in exactly the same way. For example, she lived in an unrelenting Groundhog Day of laundry, shopping, and rearing us kids. So in looking at this notion of Groundhog Day, I wanted to see what our Groundhog Day was. You know, we've talked, there are repeated messages that occur. And the overriding one is this notion of a traditional curriculum. And physical education is seen as merely being about sport and recreation. A doing subject that can be equated to sport. The curriculum seems to predominantly remain biased towards games, and on the whole reinforcing girls' and boys' activities. School sport is focused on high performance and rarely takes into account the diverse characteristics of individuals in school sport and the wide variety of contexts in which school-based curricula are implemented. Many kids are already expressing, and this was in '96, to researchers their unhappiness about PE. Research that indicates that some kids will dress for class but will not enter the game by choice, and when they are forced to enter the field of play, refuse to become involved in the competition. McDonald and Kirk and McDonald asked, what does PE prepare students for? When issues of ability and skill are positioned as the prime requirements for legitimate participation, then many students miss out. Children are learning how to behave in sport, and yet it is not educative, at least not in a form we would recognize. Traditionally, the teacher controls knowledge, regulates behavior, paces the lesson, directs knowledge, and elicits different degrees of student participation in lessons. Traditionally, physical education begins with the technique of movement, and once this has been mastered, perceptually, tactical and social elements added. However, this takes no account of the idea that movement is a social experience. Green warned that while the prominent concerns of teachers revolve around enjoyment, sports performance, fitness, and lifelong participation, the realities of that practice doesn't come close to actualizing this ambition. In other words, while they, the teachers, said that PE was a valued cultural practice, they positioned sport in general and team games in particular at the heart of their doing. 40 years ago, Hendry suggested that the PE teacher is seen as holding a disciplinary role and concentrating on the very able and skilled pupils, while lacking some understanding of those less interested in the subject. How much has changed? Seatentop suggested that business unusual for PE would be defined as decontextualized skills and techniques. And Enstrom suggested that we must move beyond these traditional and competitive ideas around sport and performance and find ways, however possible, to help people succeed in physical education. If the ultimate purpose of physical education and its supplementary activities like intramural and extracurricular sports is the promotion of ongoing active lifestyles and lifelong participation in sport and physical activity, then surely there is a strong case for a wholesale change in focus. So the question to me is this our Groundhog Day? Are we underpinned by a series of beliefs and knowledge about the way practice is done that keep us in the same cycle in terms of the way we work? But in thinking about the traditional, it's not just these aspects, there are many more diverse aspects that affect. So in analysing, I came across 6 themes that underpin this traditional notion of physical education. And the first one was some of the myths and legends that underpin what we do. And then the state of play, so where are we now? So what are we learning about what's happening in PE at the moment, and where it comes from and where it might be going? And one of the recurring themes is this notion of girls' participation in sport. And I've added in this notion of what I've called, for want of a better term, non-sporty boys, in terms of how their engagement in physical education is undermined or determined within this traditional approach. We've moved with our degree programs and with our training programs to a notion of kinesiology, so we actually get to a sense of measuring movement, but not actually doing movement in terms of the way we look at these processes. We also identify ourselves often as a subject in crisis. We need to justify ourselves, and we find different ways of doing that and different ideas to engage with. And is that the way it's working? And finally, the notion of the hidden curriculum and how that's impacting on our aspirations to do things and the realities of what can actually happen in schools. So myths and legends. Physical education is traditionally centred on sport. It has done so because sport is believed to benefit learners and help them to engage in character building and increase social competence, aesthetic awareness, fitness and motor skill development. However, the development of these benefits is fairly haphazard, as it occurs in the hope that the process, in a mixing bowl fashion, has helped to develop desirable qualities in our students. The popular view, some would say the urban myth, is that there is a clear connection between playing sports and developing the development of social and moral character, which owes its origins to English public schools. So much so that national documents and curricula are filled with hopes that all children will develop physical competence and confidence and a positive attitude towards physical activity in which they make informed choices about their own participation. It was believed that playing sport, particularly team games, was educationally useful as it had social and moral outcomes. The ability to cooperate with others on the basis of understanding and respect, and the ability to put the cause first without resentment and there's the stutter. Bitterness were all thought to be worthwhile outcomes of sport. Team games are used to school children in being civilized through socially sanctioned forms of rough, sometimes violent physical contact. In this sanctioned form of play strengthens the position of some and forces others into feelings of terror, fear, and bodily turmoil. Many supporters of PE as team games justify its inclusion, indeed its dominance, with talk about character development and health promotion. And yet, as Whitehead and that should be Fox, I'll get that right, Fox suggested, the dog bit the hand of the master and has become the master itself. In other words, school sport, once a vehicle for learning, is now in control of PE. And yet sport doesn't teach character building and it doesn't teach character building and increase social competence, aesthetic awareness, fitness, and motor skill development. Hellison suggested that claims made about sport that it builds character, makes you feel better, and encourages fair play in class and life far outstrip any evidence that might support such an argument. So is this our Groundhog Day? That actually we build a lot of our ideas and aspirations maybe on things that aren't actually, not necessarily not true, but not necessarily defensible. You know, we don't have the evidence to suggest that that's what it does, and yet there's an assumption at international, national level that that's what it actually does. So where are we now? What's the state of play in terms of the processes that happen? Now, Locke suggested that in an intolerable number of incidents and in intolerable ways, physical education classes do not achieve their objectives. In the most profound sense of what we mean by the word education, they do not work. PE doesn't correspond to the kids' interests, and it provides little opportunity to develop their self. If students are good at games or enjoy games, then great. If not, then what does PE have to offer? It doesn't replicate the images that dominate the space and time that these students occupy, and therefore seems irrelevant. So much so that what physical education does is now obvious to policymakers and communities. Team games. Some students learn to love games, while others learn not to enjoy movement activities and instead find humiliation and embarrassment. In response to my blog last week, Patty wrote, legislators attempting to include a bill that would change teacher licensing requirements for classroom teachers and other subject areas. Anyone who had a bachelor degree on some experience in a content area could apply for a classroom teacher license. And anyone with a high school diploma would be able to apply for a music, art, PE, and health education position. Sheila Hoffman predicted this in 1987 when he wrote, and I'm paraphrasing him, the year is 2020 and the last school district in Florida finally throws in the towel and closes its physical education program, joining every other country in the world. The writing will be on the wall for a decade or more, and only the die-hard supporters of PE, some would say romantics, have managed to keep this program running to date. The perceived truth was, in Hoffman's perception, that journeymen and women are often more knowledgeable and have more experience in specific sports than the PE teacher, and they were cheaper to train and employ. 4 weeks rather than 4 years were required for the basic first aid training, etc. And where PE teachers were seen as specialists in generalism, these individuals had more expertise. The need to hire coaches with a pedagogic background can be removed in favour of those who could win, and at all costs. Even when teachers tried to argue against this, they had no evidence of their own as to the effectiveness of their programs, not over 10 years, 5 years, or even 2 years. But why? The ecology of schools are ever changing, and what works in one lesson doesn't always work in the next, let alone in the next year or the next decade. They are fluid places that need skill to navigate and understand. So is this our Groundhog Day? Are we actually, by offering a program of team games, we're actually positioning ourselves to be replaced by the football coach who comes in on an hourly basis and runs the things that we've made so important? And it's happening, you know. I think somebody described it to me as dodging a bullet. You know, the legislation didn't go through, but this is where the talking's going. And one of the groups that are not getting the most they can out of physical education is girls and non-sporty boys, as the evidence suggests. It is commonly believed that men and boys engage in masculine sports that celebrate speed and power, while women and girls engage in gymnastics and dance, rhythmical activities. If you want an example of that, look at the Olympic gymnastics program. One is fairly strength-based and one is fairly artistic, and that's the way that they're perceived, and it moves forward in that way. In schools, girls were simply invited into the boys' curriculum, boys' physical education classrooms, and that these classrooms simply did not acknowledge the needs of both genders. Worryingly, no curriculum in physical education has been as effective in constraining opportunities and alienating girls and many boys than that found in a co-educational multi-activity sports class. That is not to say that there aren't outstanding teachers, but Ennis argued that highly competent teachers who are motivated and energetic have used multi-sport curriculum successfully for many years, yet this occurs mainly through their strength and dedication. In other words, these teachers gain success in spite of the curriculum and not because of it. However, in PE, girls are positioned as needy, as lacking, and as being the weaker sex. Girls come to accept this view, and rather than seeking to resist the dominant belief that boys are better, they develop their own strategies, most notably through their disengagement. Girls are seen as powerless and frail. They are also portrayed as simply not valuing movement or physical activity. The strength of these beliefs is such that, in wanting to be a woman and womanly, girls seek to conform to being powerless and frail, and don a costume and put on a show, much like an actor wears a costume to perform. Boys were positioned as being team sportsmen, and their learning was focused on the traditions and expectations of these sports. They were told what to do, and then given the independence to do it. They were expected to be good and engage in physical education, but not at dance. And in this one area, they were expected to be resistant. Any deviation from either of these truths, then the boy's masculinity was challenged. Boys who don't participate and girls who do the subject are subject to negative social and sexual slurs, especially when these slurs come from other students and parents. Girls won't be permitted to participate equitably in most activity team sports curricula. And this furthers the idea that boys see girls as the problem because they get in the way of their aspirations to play competitive sport with their peers. Ennis suggested that boys believed that to be selected for future teams and respected by their male peers, they had to demonstrate their aggression and cool moves regardless of the impact on less able classmates. Girls were seen as being tentative, resistant and reluctant, where teachers perceived the need to be persuasive and supportive to their engagement in physical education. Flintoff and Scraton suggested that so-called new evidence showing that PE was turning off girls was not really new, and in fact differed little from evidence that were gathered in the 80s. Girls were still being viewed as the problem rather than PE itself, where issues of the past remained issues in the present. Wearing PE uniform, no jury rules, compulsory showers and having to play games out in the cold. They didn't want to do all the traditional games, and that very little of what was offered was relevant to what the girls did out of school, e.g. swimming, aerobics, dance, etc. So this is the curriculum. But what's happening is new evidence that research in Australia, for instance, built up a picture of both active and engagement young people who were seen in their PE lessons as uncooperative and unmotivated. And it painted a picture of a youth who enjoyed physical activity in their lives outside of school, so sometimes as frequently as 5 or 6 times a week, and yet who saw little value and only experienced boredom in PE. In other words, there is a difference between what girls do outside of school and what they do inside school. When in school, they might reject their role and the types of physical activity they are permitted to play, while outside they understand and engage in activity. Indeed, girls feel that the teachers were putting on options from their generation and not from the girls. There was a gulf between teachers' views and those of the pupils. So we have this notion here that, and we were talking to people about this yesterday, when we're talking about changing PE, we're doing some great stuff and it's being talked about in this environment. But it's going to take 10 or 15 years for those people to get into the positions to know what your PE is like. So we have to be able to influence the people who remember PE from 20 years ago. And these are the administrators who you're working with in terms of those positions. But is this the Groundhog Day? That we're actually providing a curriculum that's not relevant, the girls and boys, non-sporty boys don't want to engage in, and they do it in their own time. And they're therefore voting with their feet and are resistant to what we're trying to achieve in our curriculum. And some of that might be where we're coming from, this notion of measuring, not doing. Anderson suggested that the humanities of movement have been marginalized in our efforts to tell the story or account of movement. We have paid such scant attention to the subject matter of school physical education in our degree programs that our graduates could be described as ignorant. The maths, English, music and art we see in schools are clearly related to the maths, English, music and art we see in universities, albeit in less sophisticated, complex and intellectually rigorous ways. That, Seidentop says, is not the case for physical education. Maths undergraduate student tries to master the logic of derivation, facility in calculation. In other words, the stuff of the subject. In school, the physical education teacher learns about the subject's history, sociology, and neurophysiology. Physical education has become strangely disembodied, and the feeling of moving has been replaced with an understanding of movement. The mechanics of movement have replaced the feeling of moving, and we are encouraged to know rather than understand movement, and to prove rather than reflect on our physical actions. As a consequence, we maintain the multi-activity program, but, and it's a big but, despite the shift to a study movement, games and play is seen as non-academic, non-intellectual, non-artistic, and fundamentally non-essential. Students see PE as a break from class, a chance to play around, and somewhere to have fun. Indeed, while PE is seen as a less important lesson and a release from the academic aspects of school life, it is valued for the social interactions it affords students. Indeed, any course in the study of movement has come to be seen as just a gym class, which is nuanced rather than an important aspect of education. So have we missed the mark? Should we have focused on the humanness of movement? And what I mean by that is, shouldn't programs of movement or curriculum take account of the movement purposes of the individual and provide opportunities for all? After all, bodies are transactional in as much as they are moving. So it is to transact, to act across environments rather than to interact, i.e. to have an effect on each other, that is significant in PE. Any physical education curriculum must include opportunities to acquire the means by which these movement purposes can be fulfilled. So is this our Groundhog Day? That actually in measuring movement we've lost the joy of movement? That we can't feel it in our bones? We're having to look at somebody else and we're not acknowledging what's going on inside. So by measuring rather than doing, we lose a sense of what it is that lies in the purpose, the fundamental purpose of movement. And one of the things I'm going to argue now is that we need to justify ourselves. And if we're getting people who are coming forward after a high school diploma to go on and teach PE, and that's how the government in this country, or not the government, the state government, registered that, we need to change their expectations. And one way we've done that is to jump on a few bandwagons. Sorry, I shouldn't drink water. Joey, do you want to do this for me? Sorry. Hoffman suggested that physical education was suffering from organisational Alzheimer's, which left it confused, disorientated, and unable to put together a strategy for accomplishing reasonable goals. Henry suggested 40 years ago, schools are places where some people get respect for who they are, the head or principal, for what they teach, maths or foreign languages, and for the example they set, the disciplinarian, and for the positive publicity they garner. The PE teacher, due to the low academic standing of the subject, gets by on getting good publicity and for keeping naughty kids in check. So 40 years ago, we were the disciplinarians. More recently, Gardner Wright argued that PE has sought legitimization as a school subject and has profited, my word not theirs, from making unethical links between PE and obesity. The cult of slenderness has cemented the position of PE in the school curriculum. But is this because of its compliance with slenderness, or because of its advocacy of education and understanding around healthy living? PE presents the notion of keeping in shape as a moral achievement, and that anyone who is out of shape is lazy and immoral. In contrast, the increasing importance placed on elite sport, its public profile, income generation, potential and the weight of national expectation has increasingly dragged schools into a debate around talent identification and the creation of enhanced opportunities for the gifted few to discover gold medal events. So Houlihan suggests that PE has become a crowded space. The tensions in this crowded space emerge because of the difference between the muddled and well-meaning intentions of physical education to help everyone and the clearly defined notion that sport promotes personal and social values and learning. So we're going to provide the next gold medal winner, but we're also going to solve the obesity crisis, and we're going to solve social breakdown in stuff. So we're going to create all these environments. And while physical education can contribute to them, the argument here is that it's too strong an argument. We're not capable of doing it. It has to be done on a state, a national, or an international level. So actually, in advocating for these things, we've modeled the process, but we also haven't changed the traditional curriculum. So we have a process that doesn't necessarily allow us to achieve what it is that we set out to achieve. So the hidden curriculum. And I think for all of us, this is a really powerful experience that, you know, what we set out to teach, what I set out to do today, won't be what you take out of it. Because there are so many things that will get in the way of that. And it's how we begin to acknowledge what that is. So Dodd suggested that despite our best efforts as teachers, regardless of the level we teach at, students do not learn what we spend hours planning and conceptualizing. Many undesirable aspects have also taught us that students learn more than their teachers intended. The hidden curriculum has come to represent a convenient way of describing all the goings-on in classrooms and gyms over which teachers feel they can never gain control. The idea of the hidden curriculum offers us a frame with which to have difficult conversations with others and ourselves about education. So learning begins in the explicit curriculum. That is the teacher publicly states, and in which learning is mapped out across lessons, units, and years. This is what the teachers want students to learn. However, the covert curriculum also exists and is unspoken and non-public. This is based on teachers' expectations of behavior and how students can and cannot work collaboratively. The null curriculum, which is what is not taught, and what therefore cannot have an impact on students or allow them to show aptitude or inability. So when we choose to do something, we choose to not to do something else. And that's what our students cannot benefit from because we don't even try to teach it to them. Finally, the hidden curriculum impacts on learning. This is the unexamined, the unexplained patterns or routines that teach students about the importance, i.e. registers, tests, picking teams, etc. And then Dodd's argued what we actually get to then with the amalgamation of all these different curricula is the functional curriculum. And this comes at the intersection of all these others curriculum and is the real curriculum. This is what the students are learning, what they can and can't do, how they can and can't behave, what sort of behavior is valued, what sort of behavior isn't valued. It can be seen that lessons don't have a single meaning. Course suggested that we cannot assume that any curriculum operates for everyone in the same way. We all see things that we want to see. There are certain messages, there are certain meanings that as teachers we would prefer students to glean from our lessons, but we cannot be sure that this is the case. Kids learn that to survive and prosper in the gym, they have to behave in certain ways. They need to develop a type of street literacy. In other words, those who prosper in are highly competent in this environment, but it is the competence, respect, and even confidence that has been gained over a number of months or years. Fitzgerald was writing about disabled children, physically disabled children, and she argued, yes, kids are mean, but somewhere in every lesson is a teacher allowing this to happen. As one student said, you know, it's like Mr. Evans does the football team, and he spends the lesson with the good players, and he's not bothered about us. So is this our Groundhog Day? That we have aspirations to achieve certain things which our curriculum don't necessarily allow us to, and we have all these different curriculum operating at the same time. So it becomes very difficult for actually to map out what our expectations were about. So in one of my sessions yesterday, we were talking about learning outcomes and having a very straight direction in terms of the way that we might want to travel. And that's a very difficult thing to do, because if there are multiple curricula operating with an individual, we don't know where that person's going to go. So we can have an aspiration. We want to go somewhere. We can't necessarily always get there. By holding ourselves accountable for getting to that particular space, we eliminate the other things that could happen. We need to be more conscious of what's going on. So is this our Groundhog Day? Now, I appreciate this might not be the positive, forward-thinking, process, but I thought it was really useful to begin to look at some of these things. And it's not all doom and gloom. So we have looked at the traditional curriculum and how it underpins us, and these different aspects of myths and legends, the state of play, etc. So what is our Groundhog Day, and how, in this situation, can we move forwards from this? So my definition of the Groundhog Day in PE: a situation in which the same problems resurface year on year and impact on student learning. For example, she lived in an unrelenting Groundhog Day of team games built on the ideas of sports science and a curriculum borrowed from the boys. It has, in short, no relevance to her life outside of school. So the future, what can we do? And one of the problems with this sort of environment is that you are the guys doing this. It'd be nice to talk to everybody who wasn't here and have the same discussion. But what can we do? We need to challenge the unquestioned truth about physical education, i.e. that exercise makes you thin, that sports build character, and that competition motivates, and start instead to build a better future for our children. Significantly, different traditions of physical education are handed down, negotiated, and ignored by both schools and students of sport and gymnastics. Members of the younger generation do not instinctively follow these. Instead, they begin to develop their own by accepting, ignoring, or rejecting the bits they like or dislike. The most powerful way in which physical education is defined is through the daily yet informal activities that occur through the school year, e.g. conversations and informal meetings between students in the corridor and classrooms. It is these interactions that students develop a sense of their own community of physical education. In this way, students are able to mediate rather than actively oppose the traditions of physical education. So the question is, if students are voting with their feet, then do we need to listen to them? If people are resistant in our classes, this expression is, they didn't learn it wrong, we taught it wrong. So in talking about 21st century teachers, Fernandez Balboa argued that in physical education, these teachers will challenge the tensions between traditional and critical pedagogies. They will acknowledge that there is competition from commercial concerns to manage agendas around sport, recreation, fitness, and high performance. They will challenge tradition and avoid the habitual use of poisonous pedagogies that are applied in the belief that they are beneficial to all students, when in fact they exclude and disfranchise many more of than they benefit. And if you want an example of a poisonous pedagogy, look at Nathan's presentation yesterday. What was the name of the teacher? Mr. D. These teachers will focus on the personal development of their students and reveal the hidden curriculum for what it is, a place where the fostering of sexism, racism, elitism, political ignorance, and social stratification is allowed. To do this, Lawson argued that we need to ask ought questions. Ought questions are those challenges that look not at what works, but at the future. What ought we to do? In looking forwards and not backwards, these type of questions force us as a community to consider the values and ideologies around physical education that best serve its capacity to create a good and just society in a sustainable world. We need to challenge and modify the beliefs that those undergraduates who take a sexist, racist, and homophobic stance are biased against overweight people and are interested only in working with good athletes in programs that benefit able-bodied students. Instead of the changelessness, the Groundhog Day of physical education, PE in schools is an opportunity to socially engineer with respect to challenging the negative aspects of the pursuit of slenderness. This means exposing the folly of the media, changing our own behaviours and tolerances of different body types, and changing our non-voice into actions that make change possible, even if this means biting the hand that feeds us. We need to reconcile the extent to which our critical aspirations can be realistically lived out in the context of our curriculum practice. We must make radical changes, but not just to the way we think, but in the way we act, so that we enable students not only to learn to be passionate about what they do, but also carry out those roles with dignity and responsibility. Tinning said we need to move away from a baseline of if it works practice, i.e. pedagogy of necessity, and move to a pedagogy of possibility. We must aspire to what Siedentop described as institutionalized representations of spontaneity and playfulness, while acknowledging that change takes time, compromise and discomfort. It requires us to make mistakes, to fall down, to feel like novices again. It requires us to return to being beginning teachers, but above all, it requires a spit and sawdust, belt and braces approach to change, i.e. dig deep and carry on. Taking his quote from the 19th century Sioux Indian, I have seen that in any great undertaking it is not enough for a man to depend simply upon himself. Good job we've got each other. Thank you. It's all right. It was good.
Testing. Scott Robinson, are you here? Scott, come on down. Scott has a story to tell, and it's just all impromptu, isn't it, Scott? Yes, yes, it is. Come around here. So, well, let me hold that. So this is Scott. He's from Oklahoma. He's Native American. I forget what is the name of your tribe, sir?
Muskogee Creek.
Put it up there.
Muskogee Creek in Seminole.
And he has made these. He has made these. And each of our keynoters will receive, each of the keynoters will receive this, along with the book. And would you just tell us about stickball, please? Put that right up there.
Well, this is our game. The southeastern tribes in this area played this game for hundreds of years before the Europeans came. We're still playing it today. And you see a lot of schools, professional teams, they love to use the Native American as their mascot, which that's a whole other discussion. But because we were the sign of health and wellness for many people for hundreds of years, you know, for courage, for being a warrior, all those type of things. And this game is a big part of our society. Name for it is called Little Brother of War. It was a game that was played to settle disputes instead of going to war. But now in our tribes, we play it as part of our traditional way of living. But we also play it as a game, a physical activity game that kind of shows who we are, but also provides a way for our kids to connect to their culture and be physically active. We play it in our programs that we do with our kids just to show them this is the way we stayed healthy for hundreds of years. Our group now, Native American in general, are one of the most unhealthy ethnic groups in our country today. We suffer from high rates of heart disease, diabetes, and we're part of our program at the Indian Health Center where I work is working with the schools, the PE programs, before and after school programs, trying to reach our kids in the school, through the school, and to make it a healthier environment for our Native American children. So I started making these sticks about 4 years ago. I was fascinated with it all my life. And I have some full-size sticks out in the car. I should have brought them in. I'm sorry. I'll bring them in later. Okay. But I'm actually going to give you a pair as a gift later just to surprise you. But the full-size sticks, of course, are about 3 foot long, made out of hickory or bodark. And I started making these about 4 years ago because It's something I always wanted to learn. I met a gentleman that made them, a Cherokee man. He taught me how to make them, and now it's one of my things I'm very passionate about is making these sticks, but also because there's not very many stickball makers left. There's not very many people who make them because it's very hard work, and but it's something that I really enjoy doing and sharing with others. And when I seen Artie in Texas this past year, he said, "Scotty," he always calls me Scotty. He said, what have you been doing lately? I used to be here in North Carolina for 10 years, graduated from Western Carolina, if that's where you went. And I told him, you know, he knows what I've been doing as far as in physical education. But I said, this is something else I've been doing. I've been making the world's original PE equipment. And so I showed him some pictures. And he said, I want you to make 7 of those for our international presenters. And he said, I think this would be more American than anything we could give them. So this is what I created.
And it reads, presented to Dr. Ash Casey, 2015 National PE Institute, Asheville, North Carolina, USA. So that's Scotty's gift, and my gift to all the keynoters is this book. It's called Everyday Greatness. It's filled with a lot of inspirational stories, and it gives Ash something to do when he's flying back to England. So here you go, Ash.
Thank you very much.
So we have a breakout session that will start in a few minutes. Want to remind you again about the tweetaways. If you're not already signed up on Twitter, please go to the Twitter help desk. Lunch will be available at 11:30. We're going to reserve 90 minutes for you to peruse all of our wonderful exhibitors. And Dr. Don Hellison will be up at the Human Kinetics booth during the lunch break to take pictures and to sign his book. And have a great day. See ya.